Hello, welcome to my Wide Awake series. This is on Nessus transiting Pisces, which occurs from February 2015 until January 2034. Nessus is a centaur planet, the third in which was found. It was discovered in 1993 by David Rabinowitz. It takes Nessus 122.5 years to complete one orbit around the Sun. And it's inconsistent in its orbits. It may spend 8 years in Libra, and as we're seeing in Pisces, 30 plus. This is another centaur planet. Many of you by now have heard of Chiron. I think most astrologers, even on YouTube, are speaking about Chiron. And Nessus is a centaur energy that I've been following closely for about 2.5 years. And have compiled close to 200 case studies in working with my clients. So I'm feeling a little bit more confident in speaking publicly about it. I want to first give acknowledgement to some real pioneers in working with this centaur planet. Zane Stein, Melanie Reinhardt, and Eric Francis have really cultivated, shared, researched, and developed the Nessus material. And Nessus, of course, is derived from Greek and Roman mythology. He it's based on the story in which Nessus attempts to adopt and seduce or rape the wife of Hercules. And Hercules saw the rape about to happen and shot Nessus. There was poison involved, and I'm going to give a link where you can explore the mythology, but this is a story in which no one character emerges with clean hands nor pure intent, and that is the nature of the centaur planet Nessus. That one fearful emotion begets another, leading to rationalized actions intended to right a wrong. Nessus represents abuse, often through the generational patternings, through the emotional inheritance. Nessus represents rape and betrayal and malicious intent, corruption, crime, exploitation, bigotry, the darker race, which is always easier to be bigoted against, incest, jealousy, revenge, abusive power, sexual slavery. Nessus is the victim morphing into the perpetrator. And Nessus is important to speak about because as we're entering this very ripe era of understanding the light and dark of life. And let me allude to an example here. Dr. Eben Alexander, in his book, The Proof of Heaven, he's a neurosurgeon who in Earth time underwent a near-death experience for approximately a week of time. And it's one of the more prolific ever recorded. And he brought back a lot of knowledge and information from this near-death experience. He was taught that, or told that evil existed as an engine that drives the soul's evolution here on Earth. That we need this contrast between light and dark, love and hate, integrity and immorality to make choices, to learn, and to grow as divine spiritual beings. That evil is in fact the engine and provides that tension in which to make choice, which makes sense. And Nessus has to do with the awakening process. Chiron speaks to the wound, the childhood wound. Nessus, in the words of Francis, is Chiron on steroids. It shines the light on those dark places that once acknowledged and integrated, and often the healing takes place through acknowledgement of what has happened in your past and through the generational line. But this is a required process in this time of healing. I mean, we are all, as each individual soul, required to work with our own healing, because I love law of attraction. I love the manifestation process. I work with it and use it. But thinking positive thoughts isn't always enough if you are carrying some deep-seated belief systems about who you are, what you are or are not entitled to. This is going to bring about less effective results as you're working with your energetics. So I speak to this as a process that needs to run hand in hand and concurrent with the reprogramming of the mind, the awareness of your spiritual evolution, and working with your energies, while also being committed to the awareness of the past, which is playing out in terribly interesting ways on this planet right now. When we saw Nessus transiting through Aquarius along with Chiron and Neptune, which was 2005 to, again, 2015, we saw the rise of the internet. As Nessus was preparing, and at the last degrees, we saw Edward Snowden step forward. December 2012 is when he reached out to the woman who became the director for the Academy Award-winning film Citizen 4. There are no mistakes. But we saw Snowden step forward and speak to the abuses of technology that are being perpetrated by corporations and our government. That'll be a later Wide Awake video. So we saw the rise of the internet, of technology, and as Nessus was nearing the end, we saw a lot of information that began surfacing about how the internet was being used and surveilled, etc. Now that Nessus is in Pisces, Pisces rules the 12th house, whereas Aquarius rules that 11th house of the collective and the internet and technology. Pisces is speaking even more so about that which is hidden, and along with Neptune transiting there, which can cloud things over, that which is hidden, secrets, prisons. We're understanding prison for profit now. Also hospitalization, the spiritual past. We have a lot of brilliant people coming forth with knowledge and information about the history of our spiritual evolution that you're not finding taught in our academia these days. To go back to Lemuria and the cataclysmic event that happened, and then the rebuilding of it, what became known as Atlantis. And this was a very powerful and wise civilization where beings were using their inherent powers in much more open and conscious ways. And this is part of what you're hearing about the golden age, that we're meant to be moving into a golden age. But as always, this does require the acknowledgement of where there has been power, corruption, and abuses for thousands of years now in this area on this planet called Earth. Now, what's also interesting is in 2014 on the site waitbutwhy.com, NASA released statistics that estimated that every grain of sand on Earth, there is 100 Earth-like planets that have water and are therefore potentially inhabitable. That equates to 100 billion Earth-like planets in this universe. Or stated another way, for every 7 people on Earth, there is 1 Earth-like planet. And why is this important? Because we are coming to understand very clearly through the Disclosure Project that there are many, many other beings out in the universe, and many, many governments and countries across the world have millions, thousands and hundreds and millions of documentations and pictures detailing the experiences that many people have had. More of these governments and countries are disclosing these documents. The United States is not. And what has even come out further is within the past 4 weeks, if you look up Cosmic Disclosure on Gaiam Television, but they're offering these 2 episodes free with Corey Good and David Wilcock. Corey Good is an insider that speaks to and corroborates much of the activity that is going on at the universal level and has been going on for quite some time. So, with this, in the U.S. Sibley chart, Nessus conjuncts the asteroid Ceres in the Piscean third house and squares Uranus in the sixth house of work and service in the sign of Gemini. The U.S. Sibley chart was derived at the signing of the Declaration July 4th. And Gemini deals with communications and travel and information dissemination. Ceres represents crops, agriculture, and the environmental movement. And a few situations can be extrapolated just from this connection in the U.S. chart. Slavery, which is very much a component of Nessus, power, corruption, and abuse, provided a lucrative, proven, profit-driven agriculture situation series on the backs of imprisoned people. Chemtrails, which is now coming forward, two legislators in Rhode Island have written the first bill ever in this country wanting to know what is in chemtrails and the effect on human health. And chemtrails, or geoengineering, is the constant spraying of our skies under the auspice of climate control. The chemicals used in these chemtrails are barium, aluminum, oxide particulates, which is not good for the brain and has been linked with the rise of Alzheimer's and autism. Weather derivatives that have been traded on the Chicago Mercantile Stock Exchange since the early 90s can also be connected to financial developments with being able to control and manipulate weather. And one of the first investors in these derivatives was Enron. And there was money to be made from weather, and the most obvious benefactors might be the energy companies. In the 1960s and 70s, a green movement developed using oil-based fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. And taxpayers paid billions in subsidies to the huge top 20% producers, and small farms started disappearing. 1 in 7 people worldwide did not have enough to eat, and the rise of the genetic modified organisms, or GMOs, arose to ostensibly solve the world hunger problem. Well, that didn't happen. And what actually happened was the era of patented seeds. And the seeds were sterilized to impose more dependency on a handful of corporations. Montecito is an obvious identity. They have developed a seed that can withstand drought and floods. So if you're a private or a smaller farmer and experience a season of drought, such as in California, your crop dies. And Monsanto will sell you the seed to withstand these severe weather events, but they are sterile. So you must purchase them over and over from season to season. Billions of dollars are made that were built on the research of the 1970s and the taxpayer money. That's another example of Nessus at work conjunct Ceres in agriculture in the U.S. Sibley chart. I've followed Nessus carefully, as I've shared, and I've learned to equate Nessus again with the duality we souls experience in this earth plane existence, the duality of love versus fear, the duality of limitation, fear-based thinking, and the abusive tendencies that arise behaviorally, including greed and narcissistic consumerism, taking what's there because it's there to take, sexual slavery, sexual abuse. We have the largest numbers now for slavery in the global sense. And as I specialize in healing and clearing limitations, this was both a personal journey of discovery for me as well as another level of awakening for my clients, because challenge always goes hand in hand with support and growth. We need the dark in order to choose the light. And the contrast and law of opposites is a strong energetic on this planet. Without the comparison, we lack the necessary traction to focus upon healing and positive personal choice. And it's the law of opposites, understanding that we don't want to continue to perpetuate a way of living and leadership that no longer serves the whole. So Nessus is the 8-year-old boy that's forced to listen to his mother's problems long before he's emotionally able to comprehend or willingly be in a position to help. Nessus is in evidence when a 4-year-old girl is afraid to be left alone with her grandfather. Nessus is a teenage girl embarrassed to walk to her friend's house when the construction worker yells out lewd comments. Nessus is girls kidnapped from their schools and married off to brutal men. Nessus is peeping Toms, flashers. Nessus is policemen murdering unarmed black men in the street. Nessus is the abusive boss, father, mother, authority figure. Nessus is the priest abusing children under the veil of trust, which we're going to be even learning more about now that Nessus is transiting through that Piscean energy of spirituality. And Nessus is the shaming of sexual desire. Nessus is the homosexual man, fearful of detection and the resulting violence and judgment that detection may bring. In the case studies I've done, this was very interesting. Nessus showed up in an inordinate amount of homosexual clients I was working with in that 10th house. A very real fear of violence and judgment through being one's own self out there in the community. Nessus is the control of women's productive rights because Nessus, sexuality. Now, Saturn squared Nessus back in December of 2014. And what came forward during that time was the Bill Cosby scandal, coming up with now I think we have 40 plus women who are speaking to being drugged and sexually assaulted. Also Stephen Collins, the actor who was exposing himself in his 20s to younger girls aged 10, 13, 14-year-olds. He then entered an interview and sharing that he himself had had a childhood experience with an older woman who exposed herself to him. This is the tale of Nessus, that abuses occur, experiences happen to many, many people. All of us, through virtue of being on this planet, have had plenty of experiences with the wrong use of power. We can see in Stephen Collins' case that this was the victimized going on to be the victim. Now we can only guess what happened to Bill Cosby as a young boy that created this perpetrating situation in his life. So I'm going to speak now about Nessus through the houses based on all of the client cases. This was in the natal chart, but I'm going to bridge this into the transiting area. And Saturn will be squaring Nessus again on September 26th of 2015. And Saturn now moving into Sagittarius, which is about and tied to that 9th house of belief systems and religious beliefs and governing through religious beliefs. And Nessus and Chiron and Neptune opening up the portals of truth and the past and things that were secret. So this is going to be an ongoing Saturn first squaring Nessus as it did back in December, then again this spring, then again in September. And then Saturn will go on to square Neptune, which is about, adjusting one's sense of reality with what has perhaps been obscured and hidden. And then later on, Saturn will go on to square Chiron, which will really be bringing up some of the material of the yes, no, black, white, priest, teacher, parent conditioning Saturn is about the tribe. Saturn is about those who influenced you through your developmental periods. Saturn is about authority. Saturn is about control. Saturn is about government. Saturn is about three-dimensional linear time. Saturn is about structures that we build into our life. Squares are about adjustments, and perhaps initially the inability to make adjustment as your sense of reality is undergoing a period and shift and change. So this is quite a powerful time in the evolution. I see this as very positive because waking up, truth is ultimately your security. It's when you build a life and belief system based on falsehoods and obscured truths that causes insecurity and anxiety. And this is also happening and playing out at the micro level of people coming to terms with some of those earlier imprints through the tribe, through the conditioning that has been impeding their ability to really connect with passion and abundance and peacefulness and purposefulness. So, we need this waking up process in order to engage more fully with law of attraction and manifestation ability. Because Nessus and that which is hidden or not acknowledged, and in some cases things do need to be left alone, but the more you can unearth through awakening and then hence clearing and integration, well, you become a more cohesive person. It's about healing those wounded orphans and situations from the past in order to walk in congruency, right? So I'm going to start now with Nessus transiting through each house. For Pisces and Pisces rising, Nessus transiting through the first house can indicate this is self-mastery itself, along with the Neptune-Chiron transits, being aware of experiences that you've had in your life and how that has colored your expression out there in the world, your sense of yourself. I had a client, Nessus in his first house was conjuncting Juno, the marriage planet, and his parents were pressuring him a great deal about finding a wife and getting married. I contacted me 5 different times about this, and rather than telling him with exactitude when that would happen, we really started to explore the influence of his parents' expectations on his sense of livelihood and his sense of value and his sense of identity. And he really did come to understand what to me was an abusive expectation at the cultural level. He was Indian, of his parents' obsessive questioning and how they could not be happy until he got married. And he lives here in the United States, so we discussed that a great deal. But Nessus is about, in a very personal way, bringing up material where you have suffered and sustained abuse, and where that has colored your behavior, your emanations out there in the world, and how you conduct yourself. Another client with Nessus transiting through her first house really became a prolific teacher and healer. Because as they say, the teacher can't teach unless the teacher walks the path. And something I always look for in any experts I consult with. This is you walking the path. That doesn't preclude your contributing wonderful things out there in the world. In fact, it gives more oomph and emphasis and validation to what you have to share. And with Saturn transiting through that 10th house now, in September, Saturn's re-entering and will be squaring Nessus and your other planets over the next 2.5 years. This is going to be a real adjustment in your reality and your path in life and the structures that you build up to the community out there. This can also be avocational direction that may engage you in a much more healing and sensitive and compassionate modality than you've ever experienced in your life. So it feels like the material is much more available to you. And again, this isn't about shame or blame. This is everyone's path. This is a path that everyone is on at some level or isn't. You know, the path that people are repressing and acting out of dogma and expectations. And, you know, I imagine a lot of our politicians are, you know, bought and paid for money, right? But for you, this is a very personal journey and a powerful journey that I feel can be quite empowering and awakening and healing for you. This can bring out the master teacher in many of the Pisceans and really shift how you interact and structure and your sense of reality to your life direction and your career and your connection with authority figures. This may be bringing up material or content that may be fear-driven, limited in context with authority figures that you've had from your past. For Aquarius and Aquarius rising, Nessus is transiting through your second house. The second house of earning potential, what one values, what one owns, self-esteem, talents, abilities, and personal levels of self-confidence. Nessus transiting through this house may be bringing up issues and insights into your past of where you felt less than or less than deserving, of not feeling that you are available for abundance, don't deserve abundance. A client of mine had Nessus natally conjunct Moon in her second house. She never felt safe. Her mother was very abusive, tight, and petty. Her mother's relationship with money was very limited in her view of it. And so this client was coming to me about abundance issues. Very bright woman, very gifted person. But we were literally dealing with some of that content of the past and the inherited beliefs in connection with the energy surrounding money. And as Saturn is squaring from that 11th house of your personal goals and dreams, there's going to be some restructuring around that as far as your talents, your abilities. It may be that you're becoming interested in areas that your current peer group doesn't understand or support. This can be a time over the next 2.5 years of restructuring what your self-actualization process looks like. But certainly there is a huge focus, Aquarius, on self-esteem and those lower chakras of abundance and believing in abundance and believing that you are worthy and valuable. This can also be a shift of your value system that embraces justice, that embraces the healing modalities, the spiritual modalities, and brushing up against habitual ways of thinking, looking, interacting with peers, groups, and the collective. This may also be speaking to technology, too, and social media, and having experiences that are not, that might be negative in nature, and making adjustments around your own value system and your interaction with the collective that is more supportive, healing, and peaceful for you as well. For Capricorn and Capricorn rising, Nessus is transiting through your third house of mental thoughts, communications, speaking, writing, commercial activity, travel. And with Nessus transiting through this third house, this is a strong invitation for you to be very aware of how you speak to yourself. I find clients with a natal Nessus in the third can have some very harsh ways of thinking. You dummy, you stupid, you know, that kind of thing, where it's, you just don't speak to yourself that way. It can be bringing you back to experiences that you've had in the past with siblings, with classmates that were less than supportive. But as this material comes up, see this as an opportunity to get to the bottom of that. This isn't your story, and that or rather, this isn't who you are, but what's coming up is the belief or the story that you've built around who you are. This may be issues with what you feel is intellectual ability, which we now know our educational system is not brilliant for embracing different ways of thinking and learning. So this is a very powerful area of content for you, Capricorn, and Saturn is transiting through that 12th house of letting go and emptying out structures that you've built in your life over the past 30 years. Structures, limitations. Saturn in the 12th is about, again, getting into the past and the inheritance of the tribe and expectations. Saturn in the 12th is also about really embracing the contemplative side of life, building up structures around the spiritual side of life, the meditative side of life. So Saturn will be squaring these Piscean planets in this third house, which will be shifting and creating adjustment in your life. Ultimately, more congruency between that left brain and that right brain, because the right brain is the inspirational and the intuitive, and that third brain is facts and figures. The left brain looks at local maps, the right brain scans distant horizons. So there is a period for sure of adjustment within yourself, your own, inner connections, thought process, insights and understandings as the Saturn Nessus square comes around again in September. This can also be a time where you become more aware of abusive tendencies and contractual negotiations with educational systems, ways that perhaps you don't speak to yourself and others in a manner that is compassionate, healing, or wise. For you, Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising, Nessus is transiting through your 4th house. The 4th house of the past, the family, the home, family of origin, your soul, and how safe you feel. So this has been certainly an area with Chiron and Neptune transiting that has been shifting and changing for you. And now Nessus transiting through this very area is really empowering you to take a look at your soul journey. A client of mine had Nessus natally in her 4th house, and she was the child of a biracial marriage. Nessus is also darker skinned people, and was really dealing with some issues, identity issues associated with that. And because Saturn is transiting through your very first house of identity, restructuring your whole world over the next 2.5 years, and to see it that way. What stays, what goes, some things will need to go, and what stays is meant to be built upon. It's a time of really learning about who you are, what your value is, what you stand for, while this is bumping up against these energies of the past. How you were raised, how you were treated, how safe did you feel in your home? Are you aware that you're a spiritual being? So the very foundational aspects of your life are interacting with this Saturn process of renegotiating your reality, your goals, your ambitions, and the structuring of your life. 2.5 years down the road, you're going to be a different person. But this is a ripe opportunity for looking at some of those limiting, and for some of you, abusive background material in order to heal and integrate and experience more, be more, deal with any shame, any of the stories of where you feel that you're not enough, which is usually learned somewhere and not actually the truth. Very powerful time for you, Sagittarius. For Scorpio and Scorpio rising, Nessus is transiting through your 5th house, and the 5th house of self-expression and pleasure and creativity and children and artistic ability and sexuality and taking chances, developing safety and groundedness and self-expression, self-love, and the ability to love and enjoy life. Nessus through this fifth house, along with Neptune and Chiron, is really about recapturing, reclaiming that open-hearted energy. A client of mine had Nessus natally in her fifth house, squaring Pluto in her eighth, and her stepfather, she became aware of as a young girl, she was 16, that he was looking at and responding to her in ways that were not appropriate. And she left home. She moved out of the home, 16 or 17. She's now a songwriter, a prolific songwriter, writing about creativity and compassion. But certainly this colored her experience of, is it safe, number one, to be intimate, her sexual expression, because so often where there is sexual abuse, it's put on the abused that they asked for it or wanted it, or so this brings up some of the sexual content in a very strong way. And with Saturn through transiting through your second house, Scorpio, this is also about proving yourself to yourself, the value of yourself, your worthiness, your talents, your abilities, and how you have connected or not connected with abundance in your life. And so Saturn squaring Nessus in September, and then on to Neptune and Chiron over the next 2.5 years will be bringing up this material, and how anything, things from the past and from your feeling, am I safe enough to be who I really am, to really express myself? Can I trust that I can love life and be abundant too? This comes up with a lot of musicians and artists and really creative people who carry the belief that they can't love what they do and also earn a living and pay the bills. So that's a belief. We talk about the belief of that and how we can change the belief in order to support their passions and their creativity. Very powerful time for you, Scorpio. For Libra and Libra rising, Nessus is transiting through your sixth house of health, work processes, daily habits, your daily regime, co-workers, animals, pets, being of service, and Nessus, Neptune, and Chiron. And this may also be a time, Libra, where you are really connecting with holistic healing. And this may be bringing up ways in which you have set up your schedule in such a way that doesn't serve you, or you're finding that your services or the way you interact with others that you are service are bringing up some issues. And this is squaring Saturn in that third house, which is about strengthening and becoming an expert, speaking, writing, travel, education. There are adjustments between your mind, your thinking, and your communications, your schedule, and your daily living, and your services. This can also be bringing up communication issues with employees or people that you employ, or being employed, and communications, and an adjustment and negotiation with the communication sector and the day-to-day sector. For some of you Librans, this may even be shining the light on unhelpful medical practices, veterinary practices. Some of you are on the trajectory of being holistic healers too, and delving more deeply into the area of holistic and natural healing, and then learning to communicate about that. So a very interesting 2.5 year period here. But Nessus through that sixth house is seeking to wake you up to any abusive patterns and how you set up your schedule, how you work, and any limitations that you feel you carry as far as being good at what you do. For Virgo and Virgo rising, Nessus is transiting through your seventh house along with Neptune and Chiron. So this has certainly been a strong area of awakening and development for you. Saturn is transiting through your fourth house of the past and the family and conditioning. So this is very much a 2.5 year period of becoming aware of how the family, how the tribe, belief systems have affected all of your relationships, partnerships, marriage, experts, clients, any key relationships, personal and professional. And this can be about any energetic that is less than helpful, supportive, loving, and nurturing that you have engaged in with others. And again, this is not about shame and blame. This is just what happens. Our lens is affected by how we were treated and what we inherited from our past and even our generational lineage. So this is a time of restructuring your sense of what is family, home, soul, security, and the dynamic of relationship in all forms. A powerful time of adjustments and reality shifts in these areas. And for some of you, this may be not being available any longer to what you find is an abusive trend or a cycle or a habit that you are becoming increasingly aware of in your relationships and partnerships. Very useful time. The thing in all of this, especially because it is a sensitive connection, Virgo, is not to fall into the blame game. And as Jupiter is transiting through your sign, it is really seeking to expand your faith and your awareness and to ask for more in your life experiences. And this seems to be connected with your life direction, marriages, and vocation. For Leo and Leo rising, Nessus is transiting through your 8th house, along with Neptune and Chiron, the house of transformation, psychology, shared resources, sexuality, financial circumstances, corporate money, commissions, death, channeling. So any and all or some of these experiences have been a focus. Nessus will be shining more of a spotlight into these less overt areas of your life for you to really gain some understanding and footing. And Saturn is transiting through that 5th house of love and relationships and sexuality, and how safe do you feel playing and expressing yourself. This is, for many of you, having a large bearing on all of your relationships and intimacy. Intimacy may feel like a scary place for some Leos. For other Leos, this is a time where resources from others has shifted or been nebulous or foggy. Nessus is also about the abusive process of governmental institutions, of benefits, of insurance, social security, inheritances. This may also be bringing up issues from the past of, I have no one to support, or no one I can rely on, or that sort of thing, and bringing up the childhood feeling that you have to depend on yourself, etc. But ideally, this is adjusting your relationship to other people's resources, both emotionally, financially, knowledgeably, etc. And there may be changes in your experiences with other people's resources, corporate resources, commissions, insurance, etc. Saturn through the 5th is really seeking you to learn more about building structure into your life with children. This may be a time where children need more oversight and overview. This may be a time for some Leos where you're really connecting with your own creative ability and looking at leaving corporate jobs and doing something different and not having some of those built-in benefits. So all of these are possibilities over the next 2 to 2.5 years. For Cancer and Cancer rising, Nessus will be transiting through your 9th house. The 9th house is the area of religion, beliefs, foreign countries, people, higher consciousness, law, publishing, travel, education, media, and adventure. Now this is interesting. Over about half a dozen of my clients who natally had Nessus in their 9th house, their parents had met in concentration camps. Talk about abusive belief systems. That's just an example. As Nessus transits through your 9th house, this is more of an opening to different belief systems and how they can inherently be abusive, right? Chiron has been seeking to bring spiritual awareness and healing to these areas, even as Neptune may have clouded some of these areas. This carries a large bearing on your mind, your higher connection to the globe, the planet out there, higher consciousness. And it's bumping up against Saturn, which is now transiting through your 6th house of health, of daily schedule, work, employees, pets, animals. So there's something here about the daily environment or schedule bringing up some sensitivity and abusive issues around perhaps belief systems, media, publishing, travel. And Saturn will be working on these areas of your life, your belief systems, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, making, squares are always about adjustments. So this has to do with the day-to-day practicality of life, affecting the awakening, opening, and invitation for healing in the higher consciousness of life. For Gemini and Gemini rising, Nessus is transiting through that 10th house, joining Neptune and Chiron. And the 10th house, authority figures, people who have power over you, a parent, the community, the life direction, the vocation. You may have been experiencing some harsh examples of power corruption on your job or in the community or in the world out there. For others, this may be a trajectory that sets you on a life purpose that has to deal with spiritual healing and connecting with the community and the world out there in the way that is meant to help people overcome abusive or wrong use of power. Saturn transiting through that 7th house is bringing up old relating habits of yours, seeking to restructure all of your key partnerships, client relationships, marriage relationships. So this is very interesting. This is quite a public transit for you in many ways. This can be people that you work with. So there is a restructuring process going on with how you work, connect, interact, and relate with others, and your very life direction, community involvement, and career. For Taurus and Taurus rising, Nessus is transiting through that 11th house, along with Neptune and Chiron. Groups that you participate in, friendships, goals that you have, the collective, social media, technology. You've probably experienced some situations in any or all of these realms that may have been less than helpful. Nessus is also shining the light in these areas of your experience where you can see some abusive tendencies that perhaps you experience in relationship with friendships or group dynamics. And part of the Nessus energy is owning how you have participated and actually, exemplified some of these areas. Because, Nessus is where there's abuse and how we carry that and tend to put that into our life, in our interactions and our expectations. So the big thing here is not to be in the blame or shame game with yourself, but to understand how some of the relating dynamics and how there's been a co-creating going on. Because Saturn is in your 8th house. And Saturn in your 8th house is asking you to be much more self-sufficient without looking for the validation from others and the group. This is a real strengthening time over the next 2.5 years in your own psychological development, in working with your own resources. Other people's resources may not as be available to you. This can be corporate resources, financial resources, emotional resources. But seemingly the lesson is how to be much more self-sufficient and grounded in your own psychology and in your own resources. For others, this can really see you working with groups of people in a much more healing, wise, and compassionate manner. So this is a time of adjustments and change in these areas of your life, Taurus. For Aries and Aries rising, Nessus is transiting through your 12th house, along with Neptune and Chiron. This very much has impact on your spiritual awakening, the past, the generational inheritance, meditation, contemplation, research, prisons, hospitals, secrets, openings and developments, as Saturn is passing through that 9th house of belief systems. So there's going to be shifts, adjustments, and changes in your spiritual understanding, your understanding of the past. For some of you, this may be about research and academia and publishing and media, and adjustments with how to present this, how to use this in a vocational manner. At the personal level, this can be abuses that you become very aware of from the family lineage as well. I wish you all very well as I conclude this wide awake video. And by wide awake, it's, peace begins with truth, internal peace and healing, and external peace and healing. It's when people are operating out of their own abuse patterns that they create and manifest these very things in the outer world. Responding negatively to negative things just brings more negativity. Through the conscious awakening and healing of every soul and every human being, that feeds out into the collective, and it changes the form out there of what manifests in the external. Wide awake. Be well and thrive. I'm Jean Wiley.